All right, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
How's it going? Yeah, it was kind of fun to come into Keating this morning and see it more and more lively. My students are over in BSRL, and the other day they were being so rowdy, I had to go tell them to keep it down. First time that's happened in a while. Well, thanks for joining us this morning. We're going to have Ivy Banks join us as well, and I think should be here as soon, I expect. But meanwhile, I just always love to hear from everybody who has something they'd like to share with the group. Any good news or anything interesting that's happened? No? Yeah, Julie, you have something?
Yes, so finally, it took us a few years, but we through our BIO5 Accelerate for Success funds, we submitted a manuscript, first of two manuscripts on the work, showing that overexpression of a human Parkinson's gene called alpha-synuclein in the brain of our zebra finches results in Parkinson's-like changes in song. So it's a model for understanding the genetics underlying human vocal dysfunction. So,
wow,
quite, it was big team effort, a lot of students over the years and staff member, and to finally, have a very extensive paper submitted. We submitted it to PLOS One, so fingers crossed. We won't have to do more experiments, and it'll a fast track. And then we'll have paper number 2, which will be very exciting, which is looking at gene targets of alpha-synuclein pathology in both our finch and a mouse model of Parkinson's. So, and grants to come. So we're excited about that.
Good luck. Sounds like a busy summer.
Yes, I know. I was, everybody laughed because, right, I'm sure for everybody, colleagues and family, they said, "Oh, do you have the summers off?" And I said, "No, this is, when we play catch up and we can get a lot done, right?"
Yep. Good. Well, congrats on that. Always exciting.
Yes.
Who else has anything? Good news. Something worked in the lab. See, Megan says as part of Tripods grant, published a paper on data science, domain science collaboration. There's a link also from PLOS computational biology. They're great. Congratulations, Megan. Yeah, how much longer does the Tripods grant go? It must be another couple years. It's a nice collaborative around campus data science grant. Awesome. Anybody else? I was just happy to see my students back. They're all, they kind of feel like they're, let out of jail now, I think, enjoying being back in the lab and seeing each other. It was rough, I think, particularly on several of them. And to have to be spending so much time alone, particularly on the ones who had just moved here and didn't really know anybody. Good. Well, Ivy, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're really glad to have you here.
Sure, absolutely.
Thanks, and thank you all. So theme for today is how do we foster diversity, equity, and inclusion in research. And Ivy, you're the expert on this, but I think most of us are aware that there's lots of scientific literature that indicates that diverse groups create better science, in the sense that if you look at things like citations, that papers with diverse authors have more citations. And although you always have to be careful drawing correlations versus causation, I think it's pretty clear from lots and lots of bulks of research and anecdotal evidence that diverse groups come up with better solutions and bring more perspectives to the table. And so I'm going to start from the assumption here that we all agree that it is a good idea to foster diversity, equity, and inclusion, both from the standpoint that we think we can do better science and from the standpoint that that's our mission as a land-grant university, to educate the people of Arizona and across the world, everybody, diverse groups of people. So if we start from that assumption, then the next kind of question becomes, okay, how do we do this? I personally, as an engineer, made my way through an extremely male-dominated field. And just kind of, I never really thought much about it. It wasn't that hard for me, but I know when I talk to women in engineering, they aren't all quite as immune to it as I was. And, so what can we do to make sure that we create a welcoming environment and that we foster this? So Ivy, I thought maybe first thing you could do would be to talk about if you have any sort of background information you think would be helpful for the BIO5 members, and what resources are available here at the university.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I appreciate it. Appreciate, as always, being able to present on Indigenous lands and thinking through how they've stewarded this land through time immemorial. I start with that because, as you were talking, one of the things that you said is that that when we think about research and we think about diverse voices that are a part of research, that our research, our science is telling us that it's better. I always push on that because what I see is not that the research is better. I think that it's inclusive, that it's incorporating voices that have been silenced for hundreds of years here, specifically in our country. So when we think about this, right, I am always a visual learner. And so I think about, for example, I can go out because I have the privilege of sight. And I have the privilege of not having color blindness. And so I have the privilege of having full sight, which is something that I'm grateful for. And if I were to go out and to look at a sunset, specifically in the beautiful state of Arizona, I am able to see the different hues of oranges and greens and purples and how beautiful that sunset is. However, when we think about the opportunity of looking at that and taking away the color, right? And you see that in the black and grays, what the issue is there is that what we are seeing is not the full context of what the reality is. It's not the full context of what we can see, of course, if we have that privilege of sight. And so when I talk about that piece and I do that comparison, it's to understand that when we include all of the voices that have already been at the table, our Indigenous voices, our LGBTQIAP+ voices, our Black and African American voices, our Latina, Latino, Latinx voices, when we're thinking about research, when we're thinking about diversifying our faculty, our students, what we're doing is really thinking inclusively about how every voice matters. If we have research that is completely from one lens, right? And when we think about research historically, it has our numbers with respect to research institutions and faculty that are leading research hasn't changed since the 80s. Our numbers are very similar as they have been since the 80s when we think about our Black faculty, our Indigenous faculty, less than 1% nationally, when we think about our Hispanic, Latino, Latino, Latinx faculty. So the concept is that if we push more for an inclusive viewpoint, we are able to see how others are navigating the space. And because of that, that's what's beautiful about diverse research. It's because we have different voices that are at the table. We're able to see how, if I add this different hue, wow, what a concept for me to think about this in this capacity. When I think about the research that is being done by the nonprofit All of Us, and their goal simply is to bring the voice of our people of color, our communities of color to the medical profession and say, we've been excluded, right, from medical research So when you added that group, what a different layer to understand how this group responds to different medicines, how this group responds to different ideologies and respects for thinking of the what we call the doctor-patient relationship. Because we're thinking about that from the Indigenous perspective, because their layer and their lens for how they look at medical research and how they look at the idea of healing incorporates a little bit different than that original thought process of how we have developed this idea of healing and medicine. So when we added that layer, it wasn't that it was better, it was rich, it was inclusive, because now we're able to see, wow, let's think about this. If I am able to bring in a healing circle, if I am able to talk through and think about restorative healing and have conversations about how it impacts the person and not just think about how we can punish punitive the person that caused the impact. So the concepts that we're pushing forward is that when we think inclusively, when we think about ensuring that all voices are amplified at the table, if I am a member of the disability community or any of the other communities that we're talking about, I don't have to find my fit. The burden is not on me. I automatically have been considered. So you've already thought about someone that's colorblind when we do a presentation. You've already thought about someone that is approaching the space with a different ability to a different type of thought process. You're already thinking about someone in the research who has to take time throughout the day in order to pray, right? All of those pieces that when we think about this inclusive idea of research, it's because we're now centering the person. We're now centering the groups that may be a part of our research, both internally, long-term and short-term, and those that will be impacted. So I think it's a powerful place because we're now giving voice to we're amplifying voices, and we're also seeing how, if we approach it from a different perspective, how powerful it will be. One of the greatest examples of that is, I always say this, and everyone that works for me has a Blockbuster card. It looks exactly like the rental card from Blockbuster, and I am dating myself with that. And I share that all the time. And the reason why everyone has a Blockbuster card is because I felt the powerful story of when Netflix originally approached Blockbuster and said, hey, we have this wonderful idea. Let's think about how we can think differently. We can think innovatively. And Blockbuster said, there's no way. This is how we've always done this. This is the best approach because there's no way you'll change the culture for America to stop coming to us every Friday and paying ridiculous fines in order to have a movie again, for an extra hour. And Netflix continued to pursue. And within 1 year, Blockbuster was rendered obsolete. And the power in that story is when we bring diverse voices, when we bring diverse ideas, when we think innovatively by including different voices instead of excluding, which is what Blockbuster did, we see how we can revolutionize the entire industry, how we can revolutionize and think differently. And there's no one that's not streaming right now, right? There's no one that's in that field anymore because we're able to push through and think innovatively with different voices. So when we think about the resources that are available across the campus for thinking about different and collective voices, I would say as you are thinking through how do I center voices, how do I ensure that diverse voices are a part of our consideration? Number one is Shirley Chisholm, my hero, my shero, says, if you don't have a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. And for many of you, you have to be that folding chair for the voices that aren't at the table. So if you are at the table and you realize that there are no Black voices, that there are no Indigenous voices, that there are no APITA voices, that we don't know the voice of our Pacific Islanders, that we have to ensure that you not only do your due diligence in researching that community, understanding the needs of the community, ensuring that you can be the voice, that you can think about how our trans community relates to different situations, specifically as you walk into the space and you can't go to the restroom, a very human emotion and something that every human has to do. So having that folding chair and being that folding chair for every single person and every single group at the table is important. It's also important to use the resources that we have available. Get in touch with our employee resource groups, such as our Black faculty, our Sankofa group, thinking about our Chinese heritage cultural faculty group that can bring a different perspective and also provide expertise on the needs of the community. So it's also expanding beyond the scope of your comfort zone. Don't be blockbuster. Expand beyond your scope and realize that when I say every Wildcat every single day is how we harness the power of diversity, is because instead of doing this, do this and say, what am I doing? What am I doing? What do I have within my privilege? Every single one of you are in a position of privilege that's at this table. And so it's, what do I bring from my position of privilege? How do I ensure that all of the voices are there? Have I taken safe zone training? Have I taken inclusion zone training? What is it that I can do to ensure not only that I understand diverse voices, but I am being that folding chair for them at the table when they aren't represented. And when I think about the vast resources that we have at the campus available in order to do that, the list is long, and we do have opportunities to not only educate, but also to innovate and push that you can get comfortable being uncomfortable, because that's the only space where we'll grow, specifically around inclusive excellence.
Ivy, I love that statement, get comfortable being uncomfortable, because I think a lot of us feel like we either need to, that maybe there's something wrong with us if we're uncomfortable. But what you're saying is that that's okay. And that we should push ourselves and move out, and that it's not always going to be super comfortable.
Absolutely. We've lived in that space in academia. When you think about the classroom perspective, for example, if we were to talk about issues of race, I know that it always breeds discomfort. And if we get emotional about that, we will usually say, okay, let's stop this conversation and move on. This is uncomfortable for us. But if we don't get comfortable being uncomfortable, we will continue to move forward without having the conversations that we need. We've adopted this idea that when we think about race and we think about these conversations in classroom, that we've adopted this scientific approach, that we have to be rational, that we can't bring any emotion, that we have to talk about this in such a way that the ivory tower allows us to talk about it without any emotion. But this is identity. This is who I am. This is who we are. So we have to be able to have those conversations. We have to be able to sit in our discomfort and say, you know what? Okay, I'm uncomfortable because I don't know enough about the trans community. And it's not the trans community's fault. It's me. How do I get more comfortable so that instead of being discomfortable and saying, you know what? I don't know what to do with this conversation. These students are getting emotional, so we're just going to shut this down and let's talk about some concepts that doesn't evoke emotion. But again, what we're doing with that is when we think about our work product, and I've had several of my colleagues that we've talked about this, and I said, what we saw over this past year is our fault. And I made a lot of people uncomfortable with that. But I said, when we think about it, that is our work product. Those people that we're talking about and trying to push them from us are the ones that graduated from our public institutions. that graduated with degrees, and we're still arguing whether one of the greatest challenges that we faced, and that's what we say that we're doing as an institution, right? If you look at what our message as the University of Arizona, we say that we want to produce scholars, students, researchers that can tackle the greatest challenges in history and that we will ever face. One of the greatest challenges that we continue to face and have faced is this idea of diversity and inclusion. And yet we produce products that we don't have this conversation in the classroom. We don't talk about it in a way that can help push us past Blockbuster into, you know, this idea of streaming. And if we look at 1982 to 2022, and we haven't moved the needle with respect to diversity, diversifying our student groups, diversifying our faculty, then that tells us that what we're doing, right, is continuing this idea of Blockbuster. We're not getting uncomfortable. We're saying this is not me, it is the institution. But when we're pointing at the institution at the University of Arizona, we're not pointing at the bricks, the mortar. That's every single one of us.
Thank you, Ivy. I'd love to open it up for questions. I think one of the things about this group that, you know, I want it to be a roundtable, not a lecture. I'd like to bring your questions and also your own thoughts and your own ideas. What have you been doing that you think is helpful to foster diversity and inclusion? But anybody have any questions for Ivy? Elena, if you're here, could you do us a favor and maybe go to the Office of Diversity and Inclusion and put in a couple links in the chat? I think that would be helpful.
So I'll take a stab at it. Hello, everybody. I'm Marti Lindsey. I don't know exactly what to call myself. I've been at University of Arizona for 20 years. I've been around the University of Arizona since 1997 when my daughter came to the university, and she, I'm of Danish background, but I've been married to a Cherokee storyteller for 45 years this summer, or 47, something like that, and spent most of my adult life in Indian country. And so my daughter went to high school in Rock Point, Arizona on the Navajo Nation, and came to University of Arizona and could not find a home. She really could not find a place where she was comfortable for a good semester. And she and our foster daughter who came with her to the University of Arizona came home in midterms and were really, really upset and disappointed. And you know, being the Pollyanna that I am, I told them just to keep persevering. And eventually they found Karen Francis Begay. And if it had not been for Karen Francis Begay, my daughter and several of the kids that I've mentored from the Navajo Nation would not have graduated. My foster daughter, she couldn't take it, and she ended up at ASU, which has a much better support system for Native students. And of course, so my lens is the Native lens, and I have been working for about 17 years to bring high school students on campus, and so right now we have 6 programs that evolved from the KEYS program, which evolved from our pilot projects for a couple of years, and that is 15 years old this summer. And we have been proud that for the most part, we have been able to select and attract non-dominant culture students. However, so many of them end up at Barrett's at ASU. They do not come to the University of Arizona because First of all, they don't get the kind of support that Barrett's provides. And then the university doesn't provide support for anybody who comes from a different lens. And having been an adult student, didn't even come with a welcome for adult students. So we have a long way to go, but I know that there's some models. The most current one that we're researching is the model of our collaboration with Torodum Community College. And we have a sense of what will create that home away from home. And that's what the university does not do. And it's not that the leadership doesn't want it to happen. It doesn't happen on the day-to-day in the department, in the offices of the university. And I am a complete, I have 2 degrees from the university. My daughter has 3 degrees from the university. I am I'm wearing a University of Arizona shirt, for God's sakes. But I don't think we do enough. And Ivy, I really love your 2 examples, the example of the sunrise or sunset and the example of the blockbuster. Both are really, really elegant examples that I'm going to look for chances for you to come speak to our researchers, because the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences has made a commitment to diversity. And I truly believe that if we don't have a diversity in our research faculty, in our research students, then we are missing perspectives that are essential to the future of the next type of medicine. So I will shut up, but thank you for this opportunity to listen. I think this is an important conversation, and thank you, Jennifer, and everyone, Elena, for organizing this.
Thank you, Marty and Robbie. I do see you there, Robin. Marty, a few things. Number one, yes, you are absolutely correct in that we have so much work to do. I would be remiss if I didn't share that working with Levi Escleta, our new Senior Vice President of Native American Initiatives, has been absolutely wonderful. I came from NAU, where we had a very strong relationship with our Navajo and Hopi communities. And one thing that Levi has done, which has been absolutely impactful for the senior leadership team, is that we are meeting with every single one of our tribal leaderships. And we are spending time, at least an hour a month in the senior leadership team, excuse my voice, where we are learning and understanding how each community navigates the space, both here at the university and then off of our campus. And we're also learning what we can do. Yesterday, I had a meeting with our admissions team, and I shared some of the notes that I received from several of our tribal leaders who talked through, you're in many cases, and you said since 1997 when your students started, that many of our indigenous communities, our tribal nations, are being forced to fit into our box. But what we haven't been willing to do is be flexible enough to understand each of those specific communities and how we need to fit into what their needs are. Again, shifting us from this idea of everybody's always going to come to us on Friday and no matter what will survive. And what's happening is our students are being forced, our faculty that are joining us that are diverse, to fit into this ideology of what it's traditionally been to being a student and what it means to be a wildcat. And one of the things that we have to shift is to understand that each of these communities brings something different, rich, and unique to our experiences here. And how do we, again, shift from saying that you have to find your fit to saying that we have already thought about it and we've already created dynamic spaces for you to be exactly who you are. Your authentic self of who you are bringing and what you're bringing to this campus is what we're looking for. That's why we recruited you. And what we're doing in that regard is, so we are, number one, looking to go out and not force our tribal nation students to come here to us. We are working to say, we need to go to you. We need to understand the community, what the needs are, see the high schools, be involved with the students as they're in the high schools and develop that pipeline. When I was at NAU, we actually went even further than that. We began the program.
Actually, you need to go to middle school.
I said at NAU, we started a program where we started an elementary school. So we began working with the families and with our Navajo Nation and Hopi Nation, and actually sending out the leadership from NASA, from my team, to talk to parents. And we started that in first grade, and we continued that relationship on. And then we continued a program where the students would come and join us in high school. But that was the high school program has always been there, but developing that rapport back into elementary school has shifted the climate on how they felt about NAU, even that first 2 years of implementation. So that's one of the areas that that I'm pushing for as I onboard here. And then the other piece is to ensure that every single one of our tribal communities is valued in that identity. So we group Native American and tribal communities into one, right? And so we say all of our Native American students, right? But when our Native American students come in, each of our tribal communities is different. So we have to be able to understand each of the communities and how we can respect and ensure that their identity is valued. One example is I was working with the Residence Life team, and unfortunately, we had a student that committed suicide that was in a roommate of one of our students that was from one of our tribal nations. And they came in, they cleaned up the space and they cleaned up the room, and they said, well, you can come back to your space now. And the student that was from the tribal community said, I cannot. I need to be removed from the space. I need to go through the blessing. I need to be removed out of this space for a certain time period so I can go back to my ancestors and I can be blessed, and that we have to come in and bring in the elders to bless the space. And our resident life to me, like, what are you talking about? Like, no, we don't have a space. We can't move this. This is, the response is like, yes, you will, because you're again asking our students to fit into this idea of what you designed. And we're not thinking about the identity of the student and how each of those unique communities need to be valued and respected. So it's learning more about each community so that we can do that. But I wholeheartedly agree, Marti, that we have a long way to go. Hey, Robin, I know that you've been waiting patiently. I apologize. I get going and it's hard to get me to stop.
Actually, I'm not sure that I have anything that is really useful to inform this process, but I just wanted to share my perspective, which maybe could be helpful to you. I grew up in the first 5 years of my life in a very rural background in Tennessee. We lived in a home with a well and no plumbing and no electricity, actually, until I was about 5 years old. And my mom then moved me from my grandparents who had been raising me to northern Indiana because she didn't want me to go to school in Tennessee. And I thank God for that decision. But, the place we moved to was actually called Hooligan Heights, and of course there were no hills. So it was sort of a joke on the fact that there was a nice place over in South Bend called Twickenham Hills. And so we lived in Hooligan Heights, which was just the opposite of that. And I have to tell you, I heard the N-word more often in Indiana than I did in Tennessee. And, as I progressed, and I like to think that I'm still progressing, you find out that, things are wrong. You do things in a better way. And, I think it's easy for someone who comes from a background which is let's say, not pathological, to assume just that everybody came from that area. And if you come from a background where you actually grew up with virulent racism and racists right in your own home, it's a difficult journey. And I think it's one of the things that I've encountered is sort of a soft I don't know how to put race. It's sort of anti-racism, or I'm not sure what the right word is. I'm a chemist. I'm not used to formulating things that are palatable to the humanities per se. But rather than if you say something wrong, and I'll give you an example. I mentioned Auschwitz at a meeting one time, and it wasn't comparing. It was just just an analogy. And instead of someone saying, "Oh, wait a minute, that's offensive to me. You really shouldn't say Auschwitz because I'm Jewish, and this is you shouldn't compare anything to that." And of course, that wasn't the comparison I was seeking to make. But I didn't hear about that directly. I hear about it because they want to go to my department head and they say, "Well, we want to fire that guy. He's from the South. He's a racist. We got to get rid of people like that." And I get just as much racism from people from nice white suburban backgrounds, and they just assume that I'm like that too. And I think we need to try to reach out to people, for lack of a better word, on the right, or that have been sort of culturally disadvantaged, I guess, in a way that's not easy to characterize, And so I think people ought to try to be more embracing and actually discuss things rather than just shut people down. And I think you mentioned this, and I think it's a good way to do this. But frankly, I don't know how to translate those experiences into some sort of policy that's going to be helpful, because policy, generally speaking, is sort of a coarse thing, and so how do you change people's hearts and minds? And so I don't know that this is useful, but I just wanted to let this spill out. But I have to tell you, I'm still making changes, and I had I used to think, well, I can not be racist, and I'll just let these other people do whatever it is they do, and I'll ignore them. And I don't do that anymore. I call them out. But I still notice things, as like I picked a flower. We have some magnolia trees over here, and they're being tortured here in the Southwest. But when they bloom, I like to snap off a blossom and bring it in my office and let it bloom, and it makes the whole hallway smell like magnolia. And my colleague down the hall was really kind of upset about this, and I couldn't figure out why for the longest time. And then I realized it's because he was darker and he didn't feel entitled to pull a flower off of that tree, and I did. And frankly, I don't think there's anything wrong with that level of entitlement. I think we should all feel entitled to smell the flowers. But it never occurred to me that I was sort of waving my whiteness in his face. I didn't because I remember I came in one time, I said, ask him if he wanted to blossom, and he just kept kind of scowled at me, But anyway, I just put that out there, and I hope it's useful for the discussion. But I don't know how to translate that into policy.
Robin, thank you for sharing. I greatly appreciate that. You said, I don't know what I have to contribute in that story, and in that space, you contributed a lot. So thank you for that. my father, who is here, and I'm so excited he's here because we haven't been able to have him travel since 2019. So he saw his grandchildren. I have 3 little boys that he's seen since 2019. So I am on a great high this week with my dad here. But my dad grew up outside of Memphis, so I was laughing as I shared that story. You know, I'm from Ohio, so I completely understand the different nuances of the Midwest. But I'll share this story with you. I grew up in a very, very, very religious household. My grandfather was the pastor of our church. My uncle was the minister. My father still is, to this day, the chairman of the deacon board, and he's also the chair of the board of trustees, or has been for many years. So when I say that I was at church, people are like, oh, you went to church? It's like, no, I went to church Monday through Sunday. Like, that was my life. I went to Christian schools. I ended up going to Christian middle school, Catholic high school, and then a Jesuit college. So when I think about my upbringing, and also the way that I learned, right? When I got older and I started transitioning into law school and into my master's program, I began to learn more about the LGBTQIAP+ community. And if you can compare the 2 worlds that I'm in a very strong religious Black family, and compared to like my exposure as I'm starting to think more about the LGBTQIA community, there was a juxtaposition there. There was a dichotomy there. And so it took me some time. You said I learned this way. This is how I was raised. This was part of my identity for so long, that it required me to get uncomfortable. It required me to push outside of that boundary so that I can understand how members of our LGBTQIA community was navigating the space. And it certainly took me some time to understand and also wrestle with that internally, because here I am, this is 6, 7 to 18, 20 years of one ideology. And now I had to marry that. And I questioned myself throughout that process of good and bad, and how am I going to think through this? And how do I continue to be Ivy and be true to my belief systems, but also understand and respect this beautiful community that I've now been exposed to. And that is a learning process. So it's not something to be ashamed of. It's something that we all go through. And what I had to do was live in my discomfort and push myself so that I can understand. I pushed myself so much so that I helped start the first Gay Straight Law Alliance, so that I can, like, I really wanted to know, like, if I become a lawyer, if I become a researcher, right, how do I ensure that I can value that voice of this community, despite, right, what I have been taught, despite of, so that I can relearn and I can ensure that I am being inclusive for a community that I didn't know much about. And then when I learned more about the community and I learned more about the history, it was absolutely beautiful. And I was able to not only become an ally, but an advocate and an accomplice. So we all are growing and learning in that comfort space. That's why I said it really is spaces of uncomfortable. When we say, well, this is uncomfortable, and it's that juxtaposition between our emotional, mental piece, and then also our rational piece, right? So those are the pieces that we grow in. And what I tell everyone about that journey that I had, and then also the journey that you may have individually, is that we have to have grace on both sides. So we have to be able to have grace on both sides to say, okay, Robin, I understand that, and I completely respect that. And this is why we can't be silent. This is why when we talk about higher education, and I push against this with our students as well, to say, that we don't want to silence the right. We don't want to silence anyone, because if we don't know how someone's thinking, for both of us, how can we help each other to learn about our different experiences? How can we help each other to learn how we can grow in our thought process? And what we've always done is shut down and say, no, that's the wrong way of thinking. And what that does is get people more angry and more resolute into saying, you know what, I'm digging my feet in, and this is exactly where I'm staying. And I'm not even hearing it because you won't hear me, so why should I hear you? And if we can push beyond that, and that you say the policies, a lot of them we have when we say this is open space and we can't shut down. And the idea of being comfortable enough to go through a colleague and say, hey, Robin, I just wanted to let you know, pulling us out, I say call in, not call out. So don't call out on social media, don't call out in the group chat. Send a private message, send an email to Robin, say, hey, Robin, I'm a member of this community, and that term brings a lot of pain, and here's why. And I just wanted to share that with you just for future reference. That is how we approach conversations. And then that would have given you an opportunity to say, oh, okay, I see that impact. Even though I didn't mean to impact, it was impact, but I'm able to see how that impacted someone else. And then I have the resources that when I'm ready, I can go back and take a look at those resources, and it'll help me to learn more about this community. So it's both sides. When I say we all have privilege and we all have the opportunity, but also the responsibility, right? The responsibility to hear and to listen and not say we are going to silence, but we are going to help each other to grow. We are going to help each other to push through. If I go back to that example, if Netflix would have been silent after that opportunity that they had with the most powerful player in the game at that time, and just said, you know what, okay, you're right. You're the power player here. We're not even going to push this. Then where would we be? So it's when we have those conversations, when we can push past that discomfort, when we can push back that human reaction to the emotion, that's when we have powerful spaces of learning and engaging. And it's okay that it takes time. That's what the process of learning is. I'm glad that it takes time, because then we all won't be out of a job, because if everyone can come in and learn everything in 2 days, I don't think we'd all have a job about teaching and educating our community. It's a lifelong process. So thank you, Robin, for sharing that. I greatly appreciate it. And Julie, I see that your hand was raised next.
Yes, thank you. So I have a practical question / request. Our students of color, both undergrad and grad, have been disproportionately impacted by COVID, as well as all the racist and violent events that are going on. Unfortunately, our CAPS, our student health services have been overwhelmed, and there are not support mechanisms there to help our students of color or bring them together in support groups where they can discuss issues that are disproportionately impacting them versus white students. I'm wondering if your office will have or has any additional resources, whether it's support groups or ability to reach out to other like-minded students. And if not, is there a way that you could work with CAPS? Because this is really an unmet need. And, I've really had my eyes opened this year because the students of color in my lab have, felt comfortable enough to talk about how this is impacting them. And I realize, and I'm sure for a lot of us, we don't have the know-how or the mechanisms ourselves to fully understand what they're going through and to help them.
Absolutely, and thank you for raising that point. And yes, so a few things. One, we have hired the embedded counselors that will be a part of our cultural centers beginning in August. They actually have started now, but we have an embedded counselor in our African American Student Affairs Guerrero Student Center for our Latinx, Latina, Latino community. We also have an embedded counselor in our Native American Student Affairs. And we are hiring a counselor currently for our APITA community, for our Asian Pacific American Student Affairs office as well. So we are going to increase our support of students, and we're bringing those individuals to the spaces where our students feel supported and valued in our cultural centers. Two is that we have received about $200,000 in order to hire a restorative healing specialist in diversity and inclusion that will focus on restorative healing after COVID, and that will focus on our students have seen more death than we have ever seen in our lifetime. They've seen more suffering than we've ever seen in our lifetime as we transition back So that is part of the healing circles, and we're doing each of them differently depending upon the community. So our Native American students will bring in elders and healing specialists. We're also doing, when we talk about some more with that community, with our Black and African American community, our ministers and our pastors that can help to do healing. So we're making it based upon each community. Additionally, I have been presenting to Helios requesting $1.5 million for a bridge back program, which focuses on 3 pillars, one being the academic bridge, because right now our students of color in the state of Arizona started 30 to 20 points back behind the majority students. As of June of 2021, they are now an additional 6 to 18 months behind in math and science. So as you're thinking about the students and the quality of students and the type of students that we're bringing in the fall semester, they will be unlike any other students that we have ever seen, because they have gone without socialization for an entire year. We've never seen that before. And when I was talking to one of our colleagues in one of the high schools in Arizona, they said only 16% of students actually turned in their assignments in this virtual world. So we are about to see a group of students that are wholly unprepared for transitioning into higher education, because for many of our schools, they allowed students to be able to keep grades that they had in the previous semester before the COVID break. It was pass fail. And so there wasn't much of that push academically, and there couldn't be because of the digital divide. Many of our first generation students and students of color, we were also seeing that they were learning from this. And if you can imagine, learning from a cell phone is not how we've designed our education system. They didn't have access to Wi-Fi. If mom was on Wi-Fi or dad was on Wi-Fi or a parent was on Wi-Fi, we're thinking about LGBTQIA community, then they weren't able to log in. And so they had to catch up in the evening, and that usually meant they wouldn't catch up. We also saw, again, the most suffering that we have. So we're looking at the academic side and saying, how do we transition our students back? The other pillar is the digital divide. And we're looking to purchase laptops and Wi-Fi's to have tech packs for our students to be able to come into our cultural centers and pick up tech packs, so that we can ensure that they're connected to the community in ways that we were unable to provide during COVID. Excuse me. And we were able to do some computers and some laptops. But even though we were providing laptops, our students didn't have access to the internet. They didn't have access to Wi-Fi. They were using their cell phones in order to do that. They did not have unlimited plans. And everyone goes, well, everyone has an unlimited plan. If it's the choice between eating and having a cell phone, we're going to eat. And so ensuring that there's some grace to our students, specifically understanding that they are not in some of the positions of privilege that we are, to be able to come to campus or to be able to access that. And then that third component is mental health. So we are looking to hire more of our team that can help our students transition back and socialize. How do we come back and learn how to make a friend if I have spent my entire year alone and in my room or playing video games? How do I socialize back into this idea of traditional learning, as we say here in higher education? And how do we ensure that we have circles of support for our students? And then how do we also deal with the trauma? Because although it was very difficult for me to look at the level of death. We've saw millions of members of our community, both here and abroad internationally, that did not make it through this. And can you imagine being 17 years old and consistently seeing 5,000, 10,000, 1 million people have passed away? And as we think about that, with the disproportionate nature of our Native American students that are coming back, who have been on lockdown inside of our tribal communities, that witness that death right here in their face and in their space because they live in generational homes. So we will have at least the next 3 to 4 years having to reset and transition our students back. So I'm hoping that another area of research that you'd be willing to tap into and think through is how we are going to transition into this new realm of higher education as we transition back from COVID.
Thank you, Ivy. And Marty, I see you have your hand up.
So taking a slightly different tact away from the students onto the staff and faculty, I'm wondering if the Office of Diversity Inclusion is starting to consider any kind of discussions about white privilege and about how each of us can recognize within ourselves our own privilege and how we can either use that to the benefit of other people or work with that to see how diversity is also privilege, how diversity is also the importance of inclusion of diverse people. And I'm just wondering if that is something that's in the planning stages, because I agree with everything Ivy has said about what non-dominant students have experienced. I have 4 in my office, and all of them had difficulties with connectivity. And then last summer, we had our Toron Community College students were all going to the local gas station for a Wi-Fi connection. And so we found out that there were Wi-Fi connections available at the university, and but we still had one student who didn't feel like asking for help, who was trading off with her sibling and her mother on the use of one computer. So I think that we as faculty and staff have to be able to recognize what's going on and help with the transition to, because it's kind of embarrassing to ask for help.
Mm-hmm. So how do we reach out in an appropriate way and encourage our students and others around us to ask for help?
A couple of good points. Thank you, Marty. I'll start with that first point. I know we have about 3 minutes, so I'll talk relatively fast. So with respect to the first point about white privilege and anti-racism, we certainly have trainings, and we do one-on-one training. So for example, I just finished a session, a 3-month session with the college or with the history department, where we did interruption training, where I popped in at faculty meetings throughout the month, and we talked for about 10 minutes, just unexpectedly, about an area or topic of diversity and inclusion. And then on Friday of that week, we spent about an hour and a half focusing in on what we can do. One of those things that was very powerful is we talked about the cruelty-free syllabus, where we're not policing. And we said, if you can read your syllabus and at the end of it say, because I say so, think about what you're doing to communities of color that have impacts from authority. And so we realized that there's other spaces that we can think about and be innovative in that process. And so we certainly do have those trainings, but we also come from this approach to that we all have a responsibility. All of us that sit in this space are in a position of privilege. So how do you use your position of privilege, every single one of us that is in this space, in order to effectuate change for our students and also our faculty and staff? If you see that there are no Black faculty or Indigenous faculty or Latinx faculty or faculty from different diversity of thought or socioeconomic backgrounds, you need to say something to your dean, department chair. That's the privilege of each and every one of us. If you see that someone is saying, well, that's really not research because you're focusing on that one particular community. Say something and use your position of privilege in order to do that. One of the greatest examples, we hear this term anti-racism. The power in that is that it means active, and that I'm actually going to do something. I'm not going to say that I'm not racist. I'm going to do something, meaning I will speak up when I see those instances happening to other faculty. I will speak up. And I always give this example because for me, this is me, it's the most salient example of how we've done that and when we were most powerful for that as a country. It is the Underground Railroad, where we realized that certain people had privileges. They had basements, they had homes. And instead of saying, I can't, they said, let's see what I have and how can I use what I have to effectuate change. And that led to one of the greatest mass migrations and freedom movements. So we can look at what we have, whether it be I have access to the internet and I will reach out and introduce myself to one of the tribal leaders and say, hi, I am Peter Powers, and I am a member of the University of Arizona research team. And I just wanted to see if I can set up a meeting with you if you can share with me how the Hopi Nation is transitioning back from COVID, and if there's anything that I can share with our research team to support the Hopi Nation. It's those pieces when you say, how do we do this? How do we get our students to reach out for help? We don't put the burden on them. We do it. We say, how do I reach out to, Ivy and say, hey, I realize that members of our Black community, aren't responding. Is there other ways that I can think about and connecting with them through the Black Student Union or through our African American Student Affairs? We'll be happy, right, to make that connection. And I will tell you that our tribal leaders will be happy to hear from you and to set up appointments with you to say, here's what we're seeing and the Totonac Nation, and here's what you can bring back to the table and discuss about research as it relates to our community. Again, don't put the burden there. Take that on your own, because we all, again, have that position of privilege. So I am open if you want to reach out to me. It's just ivybanks@arizona.edu. I'm happy to answer any questions. I see one of the links that was shared was the Diversity Coordinating Council. Please consider applying for the Diversity Coordinating Council and serving with our senior leadership team and myself on pushing forward our inclusive excellence initiatives. I appreciate you so much. I do have to run. Jennifer, thank you so much for the opportunity to engage. Robin, thank you for your story. Marty, thank you so much for your story. I appreciate every single one of you. Thank you, Julie, for the questions, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Ivy, and thank you everybody for being here. Look forward to seeing you next month. Bye-bye.